I remember the day I first told my family about my decision like it was yesterday. It was Thanksgiving, the family tradition, where everyone gathers around the table, sharing stories of the year and reflecting on the successes we'd each had. The air was filled with the warmth of the oven, the smell of turkey and mashed potatoes, but I felt cold. I had been carrying a secret, and it was finally time to let it out. "Mom, Dad, I'm leaving my job," I said softly, eyes nervously darting from my mother's hopeful face to my father's stern one. "I'm starting my own company." The silence that followed was so thick I could almost feel it pressing against my chest. My father, who had spent years climbing the corporate ladder in a world where success was measured by a prestigious title and the size of your paycheck, looked at me as if I had lost my mind. My mother, on the other hand, was quieter, but I could see the flicker of worry in her eyes. "Are you sure about this, sweetie?" my mother asked, her voice betraying her concern. "You've worked so hard to get where you are. You've got a great future in finance. Why would you throw all of that away for some hobby?" Her words felt like a slap, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I forced a smile, trying to brush off the sting. "It's not a hobby, Mom," I said, trying to explain without fully understanding myself why I was so drawn to this idea. "I'm building a platform. It's going to help small businesses grow online. I believe in it." My brother, David, who had always been the golden child, the one who went to the best schools, secured the prestigious internships, and now worked at a top investment firm, couldn't help but smirk. "Are you still doing that internet thing, Sophia?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "What is it exactly? Selling stuff on Amazon?" The laughter that followed stung even more. I had spent years watching David's every success being celebrated by my family, while my own accomplishments, however small, were dismissed. It was like nothing I did was ever good enough. I had made my peace with it years ago. My choice to step away from a traditional career path, to do something different, wasn't something they understood, and I had long stopped trying to explain. Still, this time felt different. This time, I had taken a leap that would change everything for me. I wasn't asking for their approval, but I was hoping, just for once, they would see me as more than their wayward daughter who couldn't stick to the script. "Why don't you just get a real job?" my father interrupted, his voice colder than usual. "This little hobby of yours has gone on long enough, Sophia. You're 30 years old. It's time to grow up. Real success comes with stability, a paycheck, and, most importantly, a respectable title." I bit my tongue, swallowing the hurt that threatened to spill over. What my father didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that I had been successful for a long time. The only difference was, I wasn't wearing a suit and tie or carrying a briefcase. I had taken the hard road, building something from the ground up, and it had already started to bear fruit. But I couldn't expect them to see that. They never had. The conversation moved on, as it always did, back to the successes of my brother. The familiar topic, David's latest merger, his upcoming promotion, took center stage once again. I stayed silent, feeling the weight of their expectations. I had tried so hard to get them to see things my way, to show them that my choice was valid, but each time I was met with their dismissal. I wasn't going to try anymore. Later that evening, after the table had been cleared and the house had settled into its post-feast calm, my mom came into the kitchen, her voice soft as she washed the last of the dishes. "Sweetheart, I'm just worried about you," she said, her words filled with more concern than I could bear. "All this time alone, staring at your computer screen. It's not healthy. You need people, Sophia. You need stability." "I'm not alone, Mom," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "I've got a team now, 20 people who believe in this vision." My mother stopped washing the dishes, a dish towel frozen in her hands as her eyes widened in disbelief. "You have employees?" she asked, the words barely a whisper. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yes, I do. We've moved into a real office space. It's growing." For a moment, I saw a flicker of interest in her eyes. Just a flicker, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "Well, that must be expensive," she said, her tone now laced with skepticism. "Are you sure you're not getting in over your head?" There it was again. The doubt. The constant assumption that I couldn't possibly know what I was doing. That no matter how hard I tried, I would always be a failure in their eyes. I had stopped sharing the details of my success with them years ago, when it became clear that no matter what I did, it wouldn't matter. To them, success only mattered if it fit their idea of what it should look like. A corner office, a corporate title, a steady paycheck. But that was never my dream. My dream was to create something meaningful. I didn't need their approval to do that. "I'm managing fine," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I put the last dish in the drying rack, ready to leave the kitchen. "I've got to get going. I have an early meeting tomorrow." I could hear my father scoff from the doorway. "With your computer?" I didn't respond. Instead, I grabbed my coat and purse and walked out the door, fighting back the urge to tell him exactly who my meeting was with. The largest venture capital firm on the West Coast, the ones who had shown interest in Walker Commerce. But what was the point? They had already made up their minds about my little hobby. I drove home, the weight of their disapproval sitting heavily on my chest. I had hoped, once, that they would understand. But I had come to terms with the fact that they never would. I had learned to live with their doubt, to build my success despite it. My phone buzzed, breaking me from my thoughts. It was a text from Maya, my best friend and one of the first people I'd brought onto the team. "How was the family inquisition?" she asked, knowing full well the tension I'd felt all night. I couldn't help but smile despite myself. "Same as always, David's a genius. I'm wasting my life. You know, the usual," she replied quickly. If they only knew. And there it was. The truth that had been quietly eating away at me. If they only knew how far I'd come. If they could only see the work I'd put in. The late nights. The sacrifices. The doubts I'd faced. If they could only see what I had built, not just for myself, but for the countless businesses we had helped along the way. I pulled into my driveway and sat in my car for a moment, letting the weight of the evening wash over me. It wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about proving something to myself, that I could do this, that I could build something that mattered. And that's exactly what I was going to do, even if it meant doing it alone. The first few months were brutal. I still remember the long nights, the empty coffee cups piling up around me as I sat hunched over my laptop, learning to code and trying to piece together something that barely seemed to hold together. I had left behind a stable career, a predictable future, to pursue something that felt more like a dream than a reality. But that dream was mine, and for the first time in my life, I felt that it was worth chasing. Walker Commerce, my new e-commerce platform, started as an idea, a response to the difficulties small business owners faced trying to navigate the complex, expensive online retail world. I had watched countless entrepreneurs struggle with clunky, overcomplicated systems that drained their time and money. They needed a simpler solution, one that could integrate everything they needed into a single platform. I wanted to create that solution, but it wasn't just about building the platform, it was about building something that mattered. I wanted to change the game for small businesses. I wanted to give them a chance to compete in a world that often left them behind. I saw an opportunity to do something bigger than myself. But in those early days, it was hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I was living off my savings, working in a tiny apartment that barely felt like home anymore. The pressure to succeed was suffocating, and every time I looked at my phone and saw a message from my family, more questions, more doubts, it felt like an additional weight on my shoulders. Still, I pushed forward. I couldn't stop. I knew that if I stopped now, I would regret it forever. I had already sacrificed too much, and so the work continued. The sleepless nights, the endless research, the trial and error. It became a cycle. But slowly, something began to take shape. The first major breakthrough came when we signed our first major client. It wasn't a huge deal by industry standards, but for me, it was everything. A small local business had decided to trust Walker Commerce, and that trust felt like the validation I desperately needed. It wasn't just about revenue. It was about proving that my vision was possible, that I wasn't crazy for believing that a small business could succeed without relying on the big, impersonal e-commerce giants. That was the moment I realized we were onto something. The small businesses who signed up began to see real success. They were able to streamline their sales processes, reach new customers, and grow their businesses in ways they hadn't thought possible. And as they succeeded, so did Walker Commerce. With every business that joined, we grew stronger. I began hiring people, talented, driven individuals who believed in what we were doing. Maya, my college roommate, was the first to leave her corporate job and join me. She had always been my biggest supporter, and now she was part of the team, helping me build the vision we had shared for so long. There were days when I wondered if I was doing the right thing, if I was pushing myself too hard, if it was all worth it. But then there were days when we made major progress, like when we launched a new feature that completely changed the way our clients interacted with their customers. Those moments reminded me why I had started this in the first place, to create something meaningful, something that made a difference. And it wasn't just about the product, it was about the people who believed in it too. Every time I looked at the faces of the people I was working with, Maya, the developers, the marketing team, I felt a sense of pride. They weren't just employees. They were part of the dream, part of a movement that was growing bigger every day. As the platform continued to evolve, I knew it was time to take the next step. Walker Commerce wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a thriving business. We had to move into a real office, hire more people, and prepare for the next stage. It wasn't easy. There were always obstacles, always things that needed fixing. But that's what entrepreneurship was. Constant problem solving, constant adaptation. When we launched our new office, it felt like a dream come true. It was modern, bright, and filled with energy. The team had expanded, and with each new face, I felt a growing sense of accomplishment. But even as the company grew, I never stopped worrying. There were still nights when I lay awake, wondering if it would all fall apart. I had come so far, but the fear of failure was always just beneath the surface. Then came the moment that changed everything. The moment that would put Walker Commerce on the map. We received an email from Forbes. They wanted to feature us in their annual 30 Under 30 list, recognizing the fastest-growing companies in the country. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but when I read the email again, I realized it was real. This was the recognition I had been waiting for, the kind of validation that I knew my family could never ignore. They didn't understand the work I was doing, but this was something they could recognize. The excitement was overwhelming. This was the moment that could finally prove that I hadn't been wasting my life. The moment that my hobby would finally be seen for what it really was. A legitimate, successful business. I couldn't wait to share the news. But at the same time, I knew it would only raise more questions. The same questions I had been answering for years. How did you do it? Why didn't you just get a real job? I thought about the hours I had spent explaining, over and over again, why I wasn't interested in the corporate life they had all carved out for themselves. I thought about how I had been dismissed, not only by my family, but by many in the business world who saw online entrepreneurship as a fluke. To them, if you weren't working in a prestigious firm or climbing the corporate ladder, you were just playing at success. But the truth was, I had been working harder than any of them could ever imagine. And now, it was paying off. The day the article came out, I sat at my desk, watching the notifications flood in. Friends, colleagues, clients, all sending their congratulations. I couldn't help but feel a rush of pride, but also a bit of guilt. I had kept this from my family for so long. They still thought I was struggling in my tiny apartment, barely making ends meet. They didn't know the truth, but soon they would. It wasn't about bragging or showing off. It wasn't about rubbing my success in their faces. It was about proving to myself that I had made the right choice, that I wasn't crazy for believing in something bigger than what the world expected of me. This was my victory, not just for me, but for every small business that had trusted me along the way. They were the real heroes of this story. They were the ones who had given me the chance to prove myself. I knew this article would change everything, not just for Walker Commerce, but for me, for my family, and for the way the world saw me. It was a moment of recognition, but it was also a moment of realization. I wasn't just building a business, I was building a legacy. And no matter what my family or anyone else had thought, this was just the beginning. The next steps were clear. Walker Commerce was growing, and so was I. I had learned so much along the way about business, about leadership, and most importantly, about myself. I was no longer that young woman unsure of her place in the world. I was a leader, a creator, and I had built something that mattered. And no one could take that away from me. In those early days, I never could have imagined that it would come to this, that I would one day be sitting in a modern office with a thriving business, recognized by one of the most prestigious magazines in the world. But here I was, and I was just getting started. The morning the Forbes article went live was a moment I had both anticipated and dreaded in equal measure. My phone buzzed incessantly as messages, emails, and notifications flooded in from friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. It felt like the world was finally acknowledging something I had known for so long. The business I had painstakingly built, the platform that had grown from a mere idea to a thriving empire, was now a legitimate success. I couldn't help but smile as I read the congratulatory messages, but deep down, I knew there was something I couldn't ignore. The one thing that had always lingered in the back of my mind: my family. As I sat there at my desk, staring at my screen, I felt an uneasy mixture of pride and guilt. Pride, because I had worked so hard to get here, and guilt because I had kept so much of my journey from them. The truth was, they had never understood what I was doing. They had always seen it as a passing phase, a hobby. They had watched me struggle in silence, too concerned with their own definitions of success to see that I was building something real. The first time I saw the article, I felt a rush of emotions. The headline read, "The Future of E-Commerce: How Sophia Miller Built a $500 million Empire from Her Apartment." There it was, in black and white, the acknowledgement of everything I had worked for. The article wasn't just a recognition of my company's success, but of the impact we had made in the lives of so many small businesses. The recognition was validating, but it also made me pause. For the first time in years, I thought about my family. They didn't know any of this. They still thought I was struggling in a tiny apartment, barely scraping by. They had no idea what had been happening behind the scenes. It wasn't that I wanted to rub it in their faces. I had never sought their approval. But I couldn't deny the feeling that they deserved to know the truth, to understand what I had accomplished. And yet, as much as I wanted to share the news with them, I knew they would only see it as a reminder of everything they had doubted. I wasn't sure how to break it to them, how to explain that the little hobby they had belittled had grown into something far beyond anything they could have imagined. That evening, as I sat in my office reflecting on the whirlwind of emotions, I received a text from Maya, my best friend, and one of the key members of my team. She had been with me from the very beginning, supporting me through every high and low, every setback and triumph. I smiled at her text. "So, how's the family taking the Forbes article?" I shook my head as I typed back. "They don't know yet. I don't know how to tell them. It feels like they've never really believed in me, and now they'll just see this as me rubbing it in their faces." Maya replied almost instantly, "They'll find out soon enough. They won't be able to ignore it forever." She was right. As much as I wanted to delay the inevitable, the truth was that the article would soon become public knowledge. They would hear about it one way or another. And when they did, I knew it would be a moment of reckoning for them. The next morning, as I was preparing for a series of meetings, my phone rang. It was my mother. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something inside me urged me to pick up. "Hi, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sophia," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "what is all this I'm hearing about you being in Forbes, and this $500 million company? How come you didn't tell us about any of this?" Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. The guilt, the fear of rejection, the years of their disapproval, all of it came rushing back. I had kept my success from them for so long, But now I was faced with the fallout. I could already hear the disappointment in her voice, the disbelief. I I didn't know how to tell you, I said quietly. I knew you wouldn't understand. For a moment, there was silence on the other end. Then my mother spoke again, her voice softer now. Sophia, why didn't you share this with us? We could have supported you. I bit back the frustration that surged within me. I tried, Mom. I tried so many times to explain this to you. But every time, you just told me it was a phase, that I needed to get a real job. I couldn't keep doing it. I couldn't keep fighting for your approval while trying to build something on my own. My mother was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Finally, she spoke again, her voice almost a whisper. I didn't know. I didn't know how much you were struggling. I thought you'd come back to your old job eventually. I never realized how serious you were about this. The realization hit me then. For all these years, they hadn't been dismissing me out of malice. They had been doing it out of concern. But it was the kind of concern that belittled my dreams, the kind that didn't understand that I had a vision far beyond the confines of their world. They had never seen the late nights, the long hours, the moments when I had doubted myself more than anything. They had only seen the unknown, the uncertainty of my choice, and it scared them. It wasn't about me. It was about their own fears and misconceptions about what success should look like. Mom, I said, my voice shaky. I didn't need your approval. I needed your understanding, your belief in me, but I couldn't get that. So I kept everything to myself. I built this by myself, and I did it for me. Not for you, not for anyone else, but for me. And that's something I'll always be proud of. She didn't respond right away. I could hear her wiping her tears on the other end, and then she finally spoke, her voice heavy with regret. I'm sorry, Sophia. I should have listened to you. We should have believed in you. The words stung, but at the same time, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in years, my mother was seeing me for who I truly was, not the version of me she had created in her mind. But there was still one more hurdle to cross. My father. I had always been closer to my father, but his dismissal of my work had cut deeper than my mother's. He had always been the one to remind me of what a real career looked like. And now, he had to face the reality that the daughter he had once dismissed had built something incredible. Later that afternoon, my parents arrived at my office. I had never seen them so hesitant, so unsure of themselves. As they walked through the door, their eyes swept over the office space, the team members working diligently at their desks, the framed awards and press mentions hanging on the walls. They were taking it all in, but it was clear they didn't quite know how to process what they were seeing. My father stood frozen at the doorway, looking at the modern office, the bustling employees, the vibrant energy that filled the space. "This is all yours?" he asked, his voice trembling with disbelief. "Yes," I replied simply. "This is Walker Commerce." For a moment, there was silence. Then, my father turned to me, his eyes searching mine, and asked the question I had been dreading. How did this happen, Sophia? How did you go from struggling to this? I took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling in. I worked for it, Dad. Every day, every hour. I didn't stop, and I didn't do it for anyone else. I did it for me. My mother, her voice barely above a whisper, spoke next. I can't believe this. I didn't see it. I didn't see how big this was. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. No one did. But now you see. They stood there in silence for a long time, processing the enormity of what they had missed. Finally, my father spoke, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. We were wrong, Sophia. All this time, we thought you were failing. We owe you an apology. It wasn't the apology I had expected, but it was an apology nonetheless. And for the first time, I realized that this moment wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about them finally understanding me, understanding why I had done what I did, why I had chosen this path, even when it seemed so uncertain to them. "I'm sorry, too," I said quietly. "I should have told you earlier, but I had to do this my way." As they left my office that day, I realized that my journey was never about them. It was about me, about proving to myself that I could achieve something no one else believed in. And now, for the first time, my family was starting to see it too. In the end, the recognition, the Forbes article, and everything that came with it, it wasn't just for me. It was for every small business that had trusted me, for every person who believed in my vision when no one else did. And for the first time, I knew that the hardest part was over. I had built something real, something undeniable, and nothing, not even the doubts of the people I loved most, could take that away. Sophia Miller's journey wasn't just about building a business, it was about reclaiming her own narrative. At the outset, she stood at a crossroads. Follow the well-trodden path to corporate success, where the world assured her that stability and success were defined by a prestigious job title, a corner office, and a paycheck that mirrored her worth. Or she could venture into the unknown, defy expectations, and pursue a vision that had no guarantee of success, but carried with it the promise of authenticity and fulfillment. She chose the latter, even when it meant stepping away from the comfort of what her family and society deemed as success. The road wasn't easy. The first years were riddled with challenges, technical difficulties, financial strain, self-doubt, and the constant skepticism from those closest to her. Her parents, her brother, and even some colleagues in the business world viewed her pursuit with skepticism. It was a hobby, they said. She was throwing away a promising career for something that had no real future. The emotional weight of their doubts was heavy, and at times, it felt like she was carrying not just her dreams, but their disapproval too. Every time they dismissed her efforts, every time they asked her to get a real job, it stung. But what they didn't see was the resilience growing inside her, a quiet determination that refused to fade in the face of adversity. She believed in herself when no one else would. Sophia's success didn't come overnight. It was built piece by piece, often in solitude, often with uncertainty clouding her path. But with every small victory, the first client, the first hire, the first real office space, she moved closer to the vision she had for herself and for Walker Commerce. She understood that success wasn't about immediate recognition or approval. It wasn't even about the number of zeros on a paycheck or a company's valuation. It was about creating something real, something that impacted others, something that carried her values and vision. In the midst of all the long nights and tireless work, she began to see the fruits of her labor. She wasn't just building a business, she was building a legacy, a testament to the power of resilience, hard work, and, most importantly, belief in oneself. When the day came for Sophia to be featured in Forbes, the recognition wasn't just for the company she had built, but for the woman who had defied the odds. It was a moment of validation, not just for her, but for all the small business owners who had trusted her platform, for all the dreamers out there who had chosen to follow their own path, even when the world told them it was impossible. For the first time, her family saw the success they had once dismissed, and in that moment of reckoning, they began to understand that success doesn't always come in the form they expect. It doesn't always look like the corporate job, the steady climb up the ladder, the prestigious company name. Sometimes it looks like a woman working late into the night, building something that matters, not for approval, but for herself. In the end, the most significant lesson Sophia learned wasn't just about business. It was about the importance of trusting her instincts, the power of perseverance, and the necessity of defining success on her own terms. She didn't need her family's approval to validate her journey, but their eventual acknowledgement was a moment of catharsis, a reminder that sometimes we have to prove things to ourselves before others can understand. Her success was built on the quiet moments when she chose to believe in her vision, when she chose to trust that her efforts would pay off, even when there was no clear path forward. For those of us who may be feeling uncertain, unrecognized, or even doubted by the people around us, Sophia's story is a powerful reminder that the world doesn't always see the work behind the scenes. Success doesn't always come with instant recognition, but that doesn't mean it isn't happening. It's easy to fall into the trap of seeking validation from others, especially when it comes to family or friends. But true success comes when we stop defining ourselves by their expectations and start defining ourselves by our own. Trusting ourselves, putting in the work, and staying committed to our vision, even in the face of skepticism, is what ultimately brings fulfillment. It's the quiet confidence of knowing that, even when no one else believes in your dream, you can still make it happen. Take Sophia's story as a blueprint for your own life. Whether you're starting a business, pursuing a career change, or striving for any personal goal, understand that success often requires patience and persistence. It might take years for others to recognize your achievements, but that doesn't mean you aren't making progress. The key is to keep pushing forward, to trust that your vision has value, and to stay true to your goals, even when the world doesn't see them yet. If you believe in yourself and keep working hard, you'll eventually build something that others can't deny. Sophia didn't wait for permission. She didn't need to be told she was doing the right thing. She just did it. And in doing so, she showed us that the only person you truly need to prove anything to is yourself. The world will catch up eventually. If you found inspiration in Sophia's journey and want more stories that challenge conventional paths and offer a new perspective on success, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us continue creating content that challenges norms, encourages growth, and inspires others to chase their dreams, no matter how impossible they may seem. Join our community and let's keep building together. Your story is just as important, and it's time to share it with the world.